There's something about Thursday afternoons in a school building that feels different from other days. Maybe it's the way the light slants through classroom windows, tired and golden. Or the way voices echo down hallways that smell faintly of floor wax and pencil shavings. By Thursday, the week has worn everyone down, just enough that pretenses start to slip. That's when you see people for who they really are. I remember Thursdays at Lincoln Middle School with a clarity that surprises me even now. The building was old, the kind of old that meant radiators clanged in winter and windows stuck in spring. The cafeteria had those long tables with attached benches, the kind that made an awful scraping sound when kids scooted in to sit. And there was a teacher there, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes. She taught 8th grade English, and she had this way of moving through the world that made you feel like she was really paying attention. Not in that watchful, suspicious way some teachers have, but in the way someone listens to rain, like every sound matters. I think about her sometimes, when I am trying to understand what kindness really means. Not the performance of it, not the Instagram version, but the kind that costs something, the kind that changes things. This is a story about a Thursday afternoon, about hunger that wasn't just about food, and about the moment one woman decided that compassion mattered more than rules. It's a story about seeing. Mrs. Hayes always arrived at the cafeteria during 5th period lunch. She'd stand near the windows, coffee cup in hand, watching the chaos with the calm of someone who'd spent 23 years teaching middle school. She knew the rhythms, the clicks that formed and dissolved like weather patterns. The kids who ate alone by choice, and the ones who ate alone because no one had chosen them. She noticed things. The way Marcus Johnson always bought 2 chocolate milks. The way Sarah Chen saved half her sandwich for the walk home. The way groups of girls moved like flocks of birds, sudden and synchronized. And she noticed Jamie Reeves. Jamie was 13, small for his age, with dark hair that always looked like he'd just woken up. He wore the same hoodie almost every day, gray with a faded logo from some baseball team. He sat at the end of the second table, near the trash cans, usually with a book open in front of him. But Mrs. Hayes had started noticing something else. Jamie rarely had lunch. Sometimes he'd have a small bag of chips. Once in a while, an apple. But most days, nothing. He'd sit there with his book, turning pages, pretending that not eating was a choice he was making. Mrs. Hayes understood pretending. She'd grown up in a house where dinner wasn't always guaranteed, where her mother had perfected the art of making not hungry sound casual instead of desperate. So she watched Jamie the way her mother's neighbor had once watched her, with the quiet attention of someone who knew what hunger looked like when it wore a hoodie and hid behind a book. It was a Thursday in late October when everything changed. The cafeteria was loud that day. Someone's birthday meant cupcakes, and the sugar had wound everyone into a higher frequency. Mrs. Hayes stood by her usual window, half listening to 2 teachers debate the upcoming parent conferences, when she saw it. Jamie was standing near the lunch line, but he wasn't in line. He was beside it, near the spot where kids returned their trays. And his hand, quick, practiced, slipped into an abandoned lunch bag and pulled out a sandwich. He didn't run, didn't look around frantically. He just tucked it into his hoodie pocket and walked back to his table, his face carefully blank. Mrs. Hayes felt something turn over in her chest. She'd seen this before, the stealing. She knew what the handbook said, what protocol demanded. There were forms to fill out, parents to call, consequences to assign. But she also knew something else. She knew that a kid who steals food isn't usually doing it for the thrill. Mrs. Hayes didn't move right away. She stood there, coffee going cold in her hand, watching Jamie sit down with his stolen sandwich. He didn't eat it immediately. Instead, he opened his book, turned a page, waited, like he was making sure no one had seen, like he was giving himself permission to be hungry. There are moments in life when you stand at a crossroads without realizing it. Mrs. Hayes knew she could walk over to the vice principal's office right now. She could report what she'd seen. It would be handled. Jamie would face consequences. His parents, or parent, she wasn't sure, would be called. There would be meetings, forms, perhaps suspension. That was the rule. That was the protocol. But Mrs. Hayes had learned, over 23 years of teaching, that sometimes following the rules meant missing the point entirely. She thought about her own childhood, about the year her father left and her mother worked double shifts at the diner, about the weeks when dinner was crackers with butter and breakfast was whatever the cafeteria served at school, about the shame that tasted worse than hunger, the way it made you small and invisible and angry all at once. She thought about the neighbor who'd noticed, Mrs. Chen, who lived 3 doors down. Mrs. Chen never said anything directly, never embarrassed her mother with offers of charity. But somehow, there were always extra portions at potluck dinners. An extra bag of groceries left on the porch. Too much from the farmer's market. Would hate to waste it. A casual invitation to dinner that happened to come on the exact nights when Eleanor knew her mother was working late. Mrs. Chen had understood something important. Hunger isn't solved by rules. It's solved by paying attention. Mrs. Hayes set down her coffee cup. She walked over to Jamie's table, her steps unhurried. He looked up when her shadow fell across his book, and for just a moment, she saw fear flash across his face. "Hey, Jamie," she said softly. "Can I sit?" He nodded, wary. Mrs. Hayes sat down across from him, folding her hands on the table. She didn't look at his hoodie pocket, didn't look at the book he was hiding behind. She looked at his face, really looked, and saw the exhaustion there. The kind that comes from carrying too much, too young. "I have a problem," she said after a moment, "and I was hoping you might be able to help me with it." Jamie blinked. "Me?" "Yeah," Mrs. Hayes smiled gently. "See, I've been bringing too much lunch lately. I pack this huge meal in the morning, and then by lunchtime, I'm never as hungry as I thought I'd be. And I hate wasting food." She paused, letting the moment breathe. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to help me out. Maybe we could share lunch? I could bring enough for both of us, and you'd actually be doing me a favor by making sure it doesn't go to waste." Jamie stared at her. She could see him processing, trying to figure out if this was a trap, if she'd seen, if this was some elaborate way of punishing him. "You don't have to," Mrs. Hayes said quietly, "but I'd appreciate it. And maybe we could talk about what you're reading. I always liked having someone to discuss books with." There was a long silence. The cafeteria noise swirled around them. Laughter, shouts, the clatter of trays. But at their table, time seemed to slow down. Jamie's hands were clenched around his book. His jaw was tight. And then so quietly, she almost missed it. He said, "Okay." Mrs. Hayes nodded. "Good. I'll bring extra tomorrow." She stood up, started to walk away, then turned back. "Jamie, the book you're reading, is that Holes by Louis Sachar?" He looked up, surprised. "Yeah, that's a good one," she said. One of my favorites. We'll talk about it. She walked back to her window, picked up her cold coffee, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that felt like purpose, rediscovering itself. The next day, Mrs. Hayes brought 2 lunches. She made them both the same: turkey sandwiches on wheat bread, an apple, some carrots, a cookie wrapped in foil. She packed them in 2 brown paper bags and wrote E. Hayes on one and J. Reeves on the other. When 5th period came, she found Jamie at his usual table. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. He shook his head. They ate together, quietly at first. Mrs. Hayes asked him about his book, and slowly, carefully, Jamie started talking. About Stanley Yelnats and the desert, about fate and friendship, and the way sometimes bad luck can turn into something else if you survive long enough. It became a routine. Every day, 2 lunches. Every day, they'd sit together and talk. About books mostly, but sometimes about other things. Small things. The way fall looked different, depending on what time of day you noticed it. Whether music sounded better in the dark. What it meant to feel at home. Mrs. Hayes never asked about Jamie's family, never pressed. But slowly, piece by piece, she learned things. His mom worked 2 jobs. His dad wasn't in the picture. There was a younger sister, 7 years old. Money was tight, some weeks tighter than others. Jamie tried to help however he could, taking care of his sister after school, making dinner from whatever was in the cupboard, making sure his mom didn't worry more than she already did. He was 13 years old, and he was carrying the weight of being a man in a body that was still growing. "You're a good brother," Mrs. Hayes said one day in November when Jamie mentioned making his sister breakfast before school. Jamie shrugged. "Somebody has to." "That doesn't make it less admirable," Mrs. Hayes said gently. "Being needed is hard. Being reliable is harder." Jamie looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something crack in his carefully constructed walls. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Pretend everything's fine. Pretend I'm not tired all the time. Pretend—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Pretend I'm not scared." Mrs. Hayes set down her sandwich. "Jamie," she said softly, "you don't have to pretend with me." And that's when he told her everything. About the eviction notice. About his mom's car breaking down. About the nights when there wasn't enough food and his mom would skip dinner and say she wasn't hungry. And he'd pretend to believe her, because what else could he do? About the sandwich he'd stolen. About how he'd been stealing food for weeks because he couldn't bear to tell his mom he was hungry at school when she was already working herself to exhaustion, trying to feed them at home. He cried while he talked, silent tears that he wiped away quickly, angrily, like they were betraying him. Mrs. Hayes reached across the table and held his hand. "Listen to me," she said. "You are not failing. You are not weak. You are a kid who's been asked to be too strong for too long, and that's not your fault." "But I stole." "You were surviving," Mrs. Hayes interrupted gently. "And now you're going to let someone help you, because that's what people do. We help each other." She pulled out a piece of paper and wrote down a phone number. "This is the school counselor, Mrs. Patterson. She's good at connecting families with resources, food assistance, after-school programs, things that might help your mom. Will you talk to her?" Jamie looked at the paper like it might burn him. "I can come with you," Mrs. Hayes offered, "if that would be easier." He nodded, still not speaking. "And Jamie, the lunches? Those aren't going to stop. You're stuck with me now." He almost smiled. Almost. 3 days later, Mrs. Hayes was called to Principal Morrison's office. She walked down the hallway with the slow dread of someone who knows they've broken protocol, who knows that kindness doesn't always align with policy, who knows that sometimes doing the right thing means facing consequences. Principal Morrison was sitting behind his desk when she arrived, and his expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "sit down." She sat. "I received an interesting call yesterday," he continued, "from Mrs. Reeves, Jamie's mother." Mrs. Hayes's heart sank. She'd overstepped. She'd interfered. She wanted to thank me, Principal Morrison said quietly. She wanted to thank the school for noticing her son was struggling, for connecting her with resources, for feeding him lunch every day. He paused, studying Mrs. Hayes's face. I didn't know what she was talking about, so I asked around. And I learned that you've been sharing your lunch with Jamie Reeves for the past 6 weeks, that you connected him with Mrs. Patterson, that you apparently saw him taking food from the cafeteria, and decided that the appropriate response wasn't punishment, but compassion. Mrs. Hayes met his eyes. "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you report it?" She thought about her answer, about all the things she could say, about policy and procedure, and the way institutions work. But in the end, she said the truth. Because reporting it would have solved the wrong problem. He wasn't stealing because he wanted to break rules. He was stealing because he was hungry and ashamed and trying to protect his mother from one more thing to worry about. Punishing him wouldn't have fixed that. It would have just made him feel smaller. Principal Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I called this meeting because I wanted to tell you something. I'm making changes to our lunch program. Starting next semester, we're implementing a policy that no student will be denied a meal, regardless of their account balance. We're also partnering with community organizations to provide weekend meal bags for families that need them." Mrs. Hayes stared at him. "Jamie's situation made me realize we've been missing something important," he continued. "We've been so focused on following procedures that we've stopped asking why those procedures exist in the first place. They're supposed to protect kids, help them, not make them choose between hunger and shame." He smiled then, just slightly. "You broke protocol, Mrs. Hayes, but you didn't break what matters. And I think that's something we all needed to be reminded of." Mrs. Hayes felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away. "Thank you," she said. "No," Principal Morrison replied. "Thank you for seeing him, for remembering that before we're teachers and administrators and employees of the school district, we're humans, and humans take care of each other." That was 15 years ago now. I think about that story sometimes. On Thursday afternoons, when the light slants golden and tired through windows. When the world feels complicated and exhausting, and it's hard to know what the right thing is. Jamie graduated high school, got a scholarship, studied social work. The last I heard, he was working with at-risk youth in the city, helping kids who reminded him of himself. Mrs. Hayes still teaches at Lincoln Middle School, still brings 2 lunches every day, just in case. Still believes that seeing people, really seeing them, is the most important thing we can do. I learned something from that story, something I carry with me. Rules matter, structure matters, order matters, but people matter more. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose compassion over correctness. Choose understanding over judgment. Should choose to see the person hiding behind the problem and ask ourselves, what do they need? What am I able to give? There's a kind of courage in that. A quiet, unglamorous kind that doesn't make headlines or win awards. The kind that happens in cafeterias and classrooms, and all the small, ordinary places where people are struggling to survive with their dignity intact. Mrs. Hayes showed that kind of courage. She saw a boy stealing food, and instead of seeing a rule breaker, she saw a child carrying too much. She saw an opportunity, not for punishment, but for connection, for healing. Maybe that's what we're all looking for in the end. Someone who sees us, not our mistakes or our failures or the ways we've had to compromise to survive, but the person underneath, the one trying their best, the one who's hungry for food, for connection, for proof that the world can be gentle. Maybe the smallest kindnesses are the ones that save us. The fire's burning low now. The tea's gone cold in my cup. But I think I'll stay here a little longer, holding this story like something precious. Because it reminds me that we have choices. Every day, 100 tiny crossroads. We can choose the rules, or we can choose each other. We can choose to look away, or we can choose to see. Mrs. Hayes chose to see. And because of that, a boy learned that asking for help isn't weakness, that hunger isn't shame, that the world sometimes can be kind. There's something healing in that, don't you think? Something worth remembering when Thursday afternoons feel heavy and we're tired of pretending everything's fine. Something worth carrying forward into all our small, ordinary days. We can choose to see. We can choose to feed each other. We can choose love over rules, over and over again, until the world becomes the gentle place we've always hoped it could be.